My lawyer told me to let the HOA finish building. Then I understood why. I came home expecting nothing more than quiet timber, old hunting trails, and the ranch my family had protected for generations. Instead, I found 16 luxury cabins rising on my land, while an HOA proudly sold ownership they never had. I could have stopped them on day one, but my attorney told me to wait. What happened next turned one deed, one survey, and one sheriff into the biggest surprise that crowd had never seen coming. If you enjoy true-style stories where patience, evidence, and the law matter more than shouting, consider subscribing. We've got plenty more roads to travel together. The morning I came home to the Mercer Ranch, I expected silence. Not the empty kind. The kind that belongs to land that has spent generations minding its own business. 2,600 acres stretched across western Montana, where pine-covered ridges rolled into open meadows and narrow game trails disappeared into timber my grandfather refused to cut. My father used to tell me that every fence post on the ranch had a story, and every ridge had watched a Mercer ride across it long before any subdivision or homeowners association ever existed. I had spent 23 years working for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, helping protect public lands across the West. When my father passed away the previous winter, there was never any question about where I belonged. I packed my office, sold my government house, and drove my old Ford F-250 back to the only place that had ever truly felt like home. The wooden entrance gate still leaned slightly to the left, exactly as my father liked it. He always claimed that if it ever stood perfectly straight, it wouldn't look like a real ranch anymore. I smiled as I pushed it open. The first 2 days passed exactly as I remembered. Fence repairs, checking water tanks, walking old elk crossings, replacing weathered trail markers. For the first time in years, life felt simple again. Then, just before sunrise on the third morning, something shattered the quiet. A low mechanical rumble echoed across the northern ridge. At first I assumed it was logging somewhere beyond my property. But it came again. Closer, longer, steel grinding against rock. Backup alarms, diesel engines. I stepped onto the porch with a cup of coffee still in my hand. The sound wasn't outside the ranch. It was coming from inside it. I climbed into my pickup and followed the old gravel road north, passing familiar landmarks that hadn't changed since childhood. The Mercer family hunting blinds still overlooked the valley. The weathered signs warning visitors that the property was privately owned still stood exactly where my grandfather had planted them decades earlier. About 4 miles in, fresh tire tracks crossed the road. Not pickup tires, heavy equipment. The tracks were only hours old. That made no sense. Nobody had permission to operate machinery on this ranch except me. Another half-mile brought the smell of fresh-cut lumber. Then came the dust. It drifted through the pines like smoke, hanging above the tree line. I shut off the truck and continued on foot. The farther I walked, the louder the engines became until the forest suddenly opened into a clearing that hadn't existed the last time I had ridden this section of the ranch. I stopped cold. Bulldozers crawled across flattened ground. Excavators carved drainage ditches. Concrete trucks backed toward freshly poured foundations. Framing crews raised walls beneath towering lodgepole pines. 16 separate cabin sites stretched across the hillside. Some were only foundations. Others already had roofs. A massive wooden entrance sign stood beside a newly graded road. High Timber Preserve, Montana's premier private hunting retreat, luxury cabin. Ownership available, presented by High Timber Preserve HOA. I read the sign twice. Then a third time. An SUV carrying a trailer full of lumber drove past me without slowing down. The driver never even looked in my direction. To everyone working there, I was just another man standing beside the road. No one asked why I was there. No one questioned who I was. No one imagined they were standing on my family's land. I quietly stepped back into the trees before anyone noticed me. Inside my truck sat the leather document case my father never allowed out of his sight. He used to joke that rifles protected a ranch for one day. Paperwork protected it forever. I opened the case on the tailgate. Inside lay the original Mercer deed, county survey maps, property tax receipts dating back decades, boundary descriptions. Every document carried official county seals. Every legal description matched the ridges surrounding me. Every acre beneath those luxury cabins belonged to the Mercer family. There wasn't a single recorded transfer, not one easement, not one sale, not one signature giving anyone permission to build. I looked back toward the construction crews laughing as another load of timber rolled through the gate they had cut into my ranch fence. Someone hadn't just crossed a property line. Someone had built an entire luxury resort on land they had never owned. I folded the deed carefully and slipped it back into the case. Anger wanted me to march straight into the middle of that construction site. Years of working federal land disputes told me not to. People made mistakes. Paper never did. As another bulldozer pushed earth across my family's hunting ground, I climbed back into my truck with only one thought echoing through my mind. How had an entire homeowners association convinced itself that my ranch belonged to them? I intended to find out. The next morning, I drove into the county seat before the courthouse even opened. My leather document case rested on the passenger seat beside me, carrying 3 generations of Mercer deeds, certified surveys, and tax receipts. If someone had built 16 cabins on my land, the answer wasn't going to be found in an argument at the construction site. It was going to be buried somewhere inside a filing cabinet. The first call I made wasn't to the sheriff. It was to Rachel Bennett. I'd crossed paths with Rachel years earlier while helping resolve a federal easement dispute involving public wildlife corridors. She had earned a reputation across Montana for dismantling complicated property cases one document at a time. If anyone could explain what I had just witnessed, it was her. She studied the photographs I'd taken without interrupting. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. "You didn't confront them?" I shook my head. "No." A faint smile crossed her face. "Good. That may be the smartest decision you've made." Within an hour, we were sitting inside the county records office with County Recorder Linda Foster, a woman who had spent nearly 30 years cataloging land transfers across the county. She recognized the Mercer name immediately. "I remember your father," she said. "He checked these records every few years just to make sure nobody had made a mistake." "He was right to," I replied. Linda began pulling digital records, while Rachel compared them against the originals I'd brought from the ranch. The process took nearly 2 hours. Subdivision filings, boundary descriptions, tax parcels, construction permits. Everything eventually pointed toward one thick folder labeled High Timber Preserve Development. Rachel opened it carefully. The first pages contained environmental approvals, then utility permits, then road construction authorizations. Everything looked surprisingly complete, until she reached the subdivision survey. She stopped turning pages. "What is it?" I asked. She slid the map across the table. "Look at the northern boundary." I recognized the ridgeline immediately. It wasn't theirs. It was mine. The survey line cut almost 700 feet inside the Mercer Ranch before continuing west toward the creek. Rachel looked at Linda. "Has this survey ever been corrected?" Linda typed rapidly into the county database before shaking her head. "No." "What about a recorded deed transferring this acreage?" Again she searched. Nothing. She checked alternate parcel numbers, historic transfers, archived paper records. Nothing. Finally, she looked directly at me. "Caleb, there has never been a recorded transfer of the Mercer Ranch. Not 1 acre." The room fell silent. Rachel spread both surveys across the table. Mine. Theirs. The difference was impossible to ignore. "This development exists because somebody relied on a survey that ignored the original Mercer boundary," she said quietly. "But they received permits. They received permits based on what they submitted." Rachel tapped the incorrect survey with her pen. "County offices review applications. They don't guarantee ownership. Ownership is proven by recorded deeds. Linda disappeared into a storage room and returned carrying an oversized survey tube. I think someone should see this. She carefully unrolled a yellowed survey map across the conference table, signed 42 years earlier, prepared by Tom Harper, the retired county surveyor. Every corner monument, every section line, every fence crossing, every ridge, every measurement matched the Mercer deed sitting in front of me. Rachel smiled for the first time all morning. I think we need to pay Mr. Harper a visit. I expected her next words to be simple. File an injunction, stop construction, call the sheriff. Instead, she closed every folder and looked directly at me. I'm going to recommend something that's going to sound completely unreasonable. I waited. Let them finish, I stared at her. They're building 16 luxury cabins on my ranch. I know. And you want me to let them keep going? I want them to keep making the same mistake. She slid every permit into a neat stack. Every dollar they spend improves your property. She pointed toward the subdivision filings. Every permit they submit confirms where they built. Another tap. Every advertisement. Another. Every investor. Another. Every sales contract. Then she looked me straight in the eye. They think they're creating assets. She paused just long enough for the weight of her words to settle. They're actually creating evidence. For the first time since discovering those cabins, I realized this wasn't going to be one with anger. It was going to be one with patience. The question wasn't whether the truth would come out. It was whether the HOA would realize what they had done before it was far too late. Rachel insisted we disappear. No letters, no phone calls, no confrontation, she said as we left the courthouse. If they know we're watching, they'll stop creating evidence. For the next several months, my routine became almost painfully ordinary. Every Monday, I drove the perimeter roads of the ranch with a camera mounted inside my truck. Every Wednesday, I launched a drone from a ridge overlooking the construction site. Every Friday, Rachel and I added another folder to the growing stack in her office. Date, time, photographs, invoices, permit numbers, utility hookups. Every document was organized as though we were preparing a museum exhibit instead of a lawsuit. Meanwhile, the resort kept growing. The bare concrete pads I had first discovered slowly transformed into handcrafted log cabins with stone chimneys and wide covered porches overlooking the valley where my father and I had hunted elk for years. New gravel roads cut through old game trails. Fresh split-rail fences appeared beside roads I had never approved. Someone even installed decorative signs reading, "Private owners only, future residents, clubhouse exclusive hunting access." I laughed the first time I saw that last one. The only person with legal hunting rights across that section of land was standing 30 yards away, reading it. One afternoon, I watched a marketing crew filming promotional videos. Expensive pickup trucks lined the entrance. A drone hovered above the cabins. A woman wearing a green blazer smiled into the camera. Experience authentic Montana wilderness inside High Timber Preserve. She gestured proudly toward land that had carried my family's name for more than 70 years. Our owners enjoy private hunting privileges, unlike anywhere else. Rachel paused the video after I emailed it to her. They're promising legal rights they don't own. She saved another copy. That's another exhibit. The evidence expanded faster than either of us expected. Contractor invoices listed precise cabin numbers. Engineering reports included GPS coordinates. Advertising brochures displayed subdivision maps. Each new document confirmed exactly where every structure stood. Exactly where my deed said they shouldn't. Not everyone remained unaware of my interest. One afternoon, while fueling my truck at the small station outside town, an elderly rancher named Earl Simmons waved me over. "I hear you've got neighbors now." I smiled. "So I've noticed." He lowered his voice. "Folks are saying that HOA paid millions for that property. They're saying a lot of things." Earl studied my expression. "You aren't worried?" I looked toward the mountains beyond town. My father taught me something. What's that? Never argue with rumors. I tightened the fuel cap. Wait until the paperwork starts talking. Word slowly spread that I wasn't challenging the construction. Some neighbors assumed I'd sold the northern section years earlier. Others believed I'd lost a boundary dispute. A few quietly suggested I couldn't afford to fight a wealthy HOA. I corrected none of them. Silence cost nothing. Arguments did. Construction reached its busiest point by late summer. Luxury landscaping replaced disturbed soil. Outdoor fireplaces appeared behind nearly every cabin. Contractors installed custom entry gates bearing bronze elk emblems. One morning I counted more than 60 workers spread across the property. Millions of dollars were flowing into improvements attached to land they had never purchased. Rachel called me that evening. You should come by. When I arrived, every conference table in her office was covered with neatly organized binders. She pointed toward one stack. Construction permits. Another. Advertising. Another. Contractor payments. Then she opened the newest binder. Reservations. Inside were printed confirmations showing wealthy buyers placing deposits on individual cabins months before construction finished. Each reservation included the cabin number. Each cabin number matched our survey. Rachel closed the binder carefully. They've gone beyond building. They're selling. Does that help us? It changes everything. She walked over to the large survey map hanging on her office wall. Colored markers identified every completed structure. There were already 12. 4 more were nearing completion. They're no longer making one mistake, she said quietly. They're repeating the same mistake 16 different ways. I studied the map in silence. Months earlier, I'd wanted bulldozers removed from my ranch. Now I understood why Rachel had stopped me. The larger the project became, the harder it would be for anyone to deny exactly where it had been built. Still, one question lingered in the back of my mind. When the truth finally came out, would anyone be willing to admit they had never bothered to ask who owned the land beneath 16 luxury cabins? The answer began with a phone call from Linda Foster. She didn't explain much. She only said, "Caleb, you and Rachel need to come to the recorder's office. Today." By the time we arrived, Linda had covered a conference table with old filing logs, permit applications, and yellowed correspondence pulled from county archives. She pointed to 3 certified notices. Each had been sent to Douglas Barrett's development company months before construction began. Each warned that the proposed northern parcel overlapped the recorded Mercer Ranch boundary. Each carried a delivery signature, Douglas Barrett's. Rachel read the first notice twice. He knew there was a title conflict. Linda nodded. The county planning office asked him to provide a deed correction or proof of transfer. He never did. Then how were the permits approved? I asked. Linda pulled out another document. Because Barrett submitted a revised survey. The revision had shifted the Mercer boundary south by hundreds of feet. No deed supported the change. No owner had signed it. No court had ordered it. Someone had simply drawn a new line and filed permits as though the land already belonged to High Timber Preserve. Rachel's expression hardened. This wasn't a surveying mistake. She tapped Douglas Barrett's signature on the certified notices. He was warned. Then he filed around the warning. Linda placed one more folder on the table. Inside were HOA board resolutions signed by Rebecca Holloway. Every resolution approved construction on specific cabin lots. Every lot included exact coordinates. Every coordinate fell inside my ranch. Rebecca had signed 13 of them herself. Rachel looked at me. They've documented their own trespass better than we ever could. That afternoon, we drove to Tom Harper's house outside town. Tom was nearly 70, broad-shouldered, and still kept his old county maps rolled in steel tubes inside a workshop that smelled of cedar shavings and machine oil. He remembered the Mercer Ranch without checking his records. "Your father walked every line with me," he said. Wouldn't let me set a monument until he'd matched it to the deed description. Tom spread his original survey across a workbench. Then Rachel placed the high timber preserve map over it using a transparent sheet. The false line cut deep into the ranch. 16 red cabin markers appeared on the Mercer side. Tom stared at the overlay for several seconds. "That's not close." "How far off?" Rachel asked. He measured twice. Between 580 and 740 feet, depending on the cabin. I felt the anger rise again. Not because the proof was uncertain, because it was now too clear. They hadn't missed my property by a few yards. They had moved an entire boundary to make their project fit. Tom signed a sworn statement confirming that his original survey had never been amended, replaced, or legally challenged. By evening, Rachel's office held the strongest evidence yet. Original deed, original survey, certified warnings, false boundary map, HOA resolutions, signed delivery receipts. Rachel stood beside the evidence wall, reading silently. Then she removed one of the cabin reservation brochures from a binder and placed it beside Rebecca's signed resolution. "Look at the language." The brochure promised buyers guaranteed ownership of private hunting acreage. The resolution identified that same acreage by coordinates. My coordinates. Rachel turned toward. "Every time Rebecca signs one of these, she confirms where they built. And every time they sell one, they create another victim." The case had changed. At first, we were proving a boundary mistake. Now we were documenting knowledge, concealment, and repeated sales involving land the developer had already been warned he did not own. Rachel closed the final binder. "We have enough to stop them today." I looked at the construction map. 15 cabins were complete. The 16th needed only exterior stonework. "Not yet," I said. Rachel watched me carefully. "The grand opening?" I nodded. High Timber Preserve had already announced it for the following month. Investors, buyers, reporters, the entire board, all gathered on the same ground they claimed to own. Rachel gave a slow, controlled smile. "Then that's where the paperwork speaks." Rebecca Holloway was still celebrating record reservations. Douglas Barrett was still collecting deposits. Neither of them knew the county had preserved every warning they had ignored. The legal trap was no longer closing. It was closed. Now we only had to decide when to let them see it. Rachel circled one date on her calendar. The grand opening. "That's when every important person tied to this project will be standing on your ranch at the same time," she said. "Investors, buyers, the HOA board, the developer, their attorneys. If this unfolds anywhere else, they'll control the narrative. If it happens there, the land speaks for itself." For the next 4 weeks, we prepared while the HOA celebrated. Every new television commercial featured sweeping drone footage of the completed cabins. Every newspaper advertisement called High Timber Preserve Montana's premier private hunting destination. Online reservations disappeared almost overnight. The project wasn't just finished. It was becoming successful. That success made it infinitely more dangerous for everyone involved. Rachel quietly assembled the legal filings we would eventually submit. Every exhibit was indexed, every survey certified, every deed authenticated, every photograph dated. No accusation relied on opinion. Every claim rested on recorded facts. Meanwhile, I watched the final stages of construction from a ridge overlooking the valley. Stonemasons completed the last cabin chimney. Landscapers planted young aspens beside the entrance road. Workers installed handcrafted cedar signs outside each cabin bearing bronze numbers from 1 through 16. Those numbers would later become important. Every reservation contract referred to them. Every contractor invoice identified them. Every improvement attached itself to a location that legally belonged to the Mercer Ranch. One afternoon, I noticed a convoy of luxury SUVs entering the property. Rachel identified them almost immediately after I sent her photographs. Private investor tour. She enlarged one image. The man stepping out of the lead SUV wore an expensive field jacket and greeted everyone with confident handshakes. Michael Dawson, lead investment representative. His company had reportedly financed a significant portion of the development. Rebecca Holloway met him beneath the entrance sign. Even from several hundred yards away, her confidence was unmistakable. She pointed toward the finished cabins while Douglas Barrett unfolded architectural drawings across the hood of a pickup truck. They weren't discussing whether the project would succeed. They were discussing expansion. Rachel frowned. They're already planning phase 2. I looked toward untouched sections of the ranch, stretching beyond the completed cabins. They're drawing plans for land they don't own and putting it in writing. Another exhibit. The following week, invitations for the grand opening began appearing across western Montana. Outdoor magazines, luxury real estate websites, social media advertisements. One headline caught my attention. Own your legacy in Montana's most exclusive hunting community. I read it twice. Legacy, the word stayed with me. My family's legacy wasn't a marketing slogan. It was recorded in deeds older than anyone serving on that HOA board. It lived in every property tax receipt my father had carefully filed. It stood behind every fence post my grandfather had driven into rocky ground by hand. Rebecca was selling a dream built on someone else's history. The invitations promised guided tours, ribbon-cutting ceremonies, catered dinners, and private investment opportunities. Attendance exceeded expectations. Rachel smiled when she saw the RSVP list. The more witnesses, the better. A few days before the event, I drove into town for supplies. Inside the feed store, conversations stopped when I walked through the door. Finally, Earl Simmons approached me. I hear they're opening that hunting resort Saturday. So I've heard. You going? I wouldn't miss it. He studied my face for a long moment. You've been awfully calm through all this. I've had good advice. He nodded slowly. I hope you've got something bigger than anger planned. I smiled. I do. Back at the ranch, I rode horseback through the southern meadow where my father had taught me patience long before he taught me marksmanship. He always believed people revealed themselves when they thought they had already won. Rebecca Holloway was about to prove him right. By Friday evening, 16 luxury cabins stood complete across the northern ridge. Outdoor lights glowed along freshly paved roads. American flags fluttered beside polished timber entrances. Employees rehearsed tours. Caterers unloaded supplies. A temporary stage overlooked the valley. Everything looked ready for celebration. Everything looked permanent. Only Rachel and I knew how fragile it really was. Late that night, she called one final meeting in her office. The evidence occupied nearly every wall. She handed me a folder. Inside were the final filings prepared for submission the following morning. Emergency ownership actions, requests for injunctive relief, supporting affidavits, certified surveys. Every page had already been reviewed. Every signature had been notarized. Rachel closed the folder. Tomorrow, they'll celebrate what they believe they've built. She paused before adding quietly, and before the sun sets, they'll discover exactly who they've built it for. Saturday morning arrived with more traffic than I'd ever seen on the Mercer Ranch. Luxury SUVs lined the freshly paved entrance road. Valets directed guests toward parking areas that had once been winter grazing fields. Caterers carried trays into the newly completed clubhouse while camera crews adjusted lighting around a stage decorated with oversized banners reading, "Grand Opening, High Timber Preserve." From the ridge overlooking the valley, I watched the event through binoculars. Rebecca Holloway stood at the center of it all. She wore a tailored green blazer embroidered with the HOA logo, greeting every guest with the confidence of someone convinced history had already chosen her side. Beside her, Douglas Barrett laughed with contractors and investors, pointing toward the completed cabins as if he had personally created the landscape itself. Michael Dawson arrived shortly afterward. Several investors surrounded him almost immediately. I watched him shake hands, study brochures, and nod approvingly as Rebecca described future expansion into the surrounding hills. Expansion, across more of my ranch. Rachel stood beside my truck holding a slim leather portfolio. They're making promises they can't legally keep. They still don't know. No. She looked toward the growing crowd. And that's exactly where we need them. By 10 o'clock, nearly 200 people had gathered. Potential buyers, outdoor magazine reporters, real estate agents, county business leaders, representatives from regional banks. Every important financial decision-maker connected to High Timber Preserve stood inside the development, exactly as Rachel had hoped. The opening ceremony began with applause. Rebecca stepped behind the podium. Today, she announced, we celebrate a vision that transforms untouched Montana wilderness into an exclusive community unlike any other. More applause followed. She praised Douglas Barrett's leadership. She thanked investors. She described the cabins as carefully planned assets that would remain in families for generations. The irony wasn't lost on me. Those cabins already belonged to a family. Mine. Douglas followed her onto the stage carrying large architectural renderings. Phase 1 exceeded every expectation, he said proudly. Our waiting list for future cabins continues to grow. He pointed toward untouched timber north of the completed development. We're already evaluating additional opportunities. Rachel quietly leaned toward me. He's presenting expansion plans for land he still doesn't own. Another promise. Another audience. Another witness. Michael Dawson accepted a ceremonial plaque recognizing investor support before turning toward reporters. This project demonstrates what responsible development looks like. Rachel simply wrote down the time. 11:23. Every public statement mattered now. Every recorded interview would eventually become evidence. At precisely 11:40, my phone vibrated. It was Linda Foster. They've been filed. The emergency ownership actions had officially entered the county record. Rachel checked her watch. Right on schedule. 15 minutes later, another message arrived. Judge Samuel Whitmore had reviewed the initial filings and authorized immediate service of the certified notices while the broader ownership action moved forward. Everything was now official. Nothing remained theoretical. The legal process had begun. From the valley below came the sound of another round of applause. Rebecca lifted a pair of oversized ceremonial scissors before a long blue ribbon stretched across the entrance road. Television cameras crowded closer. She smiled broadly. "Welcome," she declared, "to Montana's newest luxury hunting destination." The ribbon fell. Cheers erupted. At that exact moment, 3 county sheriff's vehicles turned slowly through the front entrance. No lights, no sirens, no urgency, just steady movement across the gravel road. Conversations gradually faded. Guests turned toward the arriving vehicles. Rebecca noticed them almost immediately. Her smile faltered for only a second before returning. She whispered something to Douglas, who nodded confidently. Neither of them looked concerned. They assumed someone important had arrived to congratulate them. Sheriff Daniel Brooks stepped out first. His uniform was immaculate, his expression unreadable. He wasn't carrying handcuffs. He wasn't accompanied by deputies moving into position. Instead, he walked calmly toward the stage beside Rachel Bennett, who carried 2 thick boxes filled with certified documents. Behind them came 2 county clerks pushing rolling file carts stacked with sealed envelopes. Rebecca met them halfway. A microphone still hung loosely in her hand. "Sheriff Brooks," she said with a practiced smile, "we're honored you could join us." Daniel removed his hat politely. "Good morning, Ms. Holloway. I wasn't aware you'd be attending. I wasn't planning to." His voice remained calm. "Until this morning." Rebecca glanced briefly at the boxes Rachel carried. "Is there a problem?" Rachel answered before the sheriff could. "There are several matters that require immediate legal service." Douglas Barrett stepped forward. "If this concerns permits, our attorneys have already reviewed every—" Rachel raised one hand. It doesn't concern permits. The crowd had gone almost completely silent. Investors stopped talking. Reporters instinctively lifted their cameras. Michael Dawson lowered the brochure he had been reading. Sheriff Brooks opened the first box. Inside were dozens of individually addressed certified envelopes. He removed the top one and looked directly at Rebecca Holloway. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "I have legal documents that require your immediate acknowledgement." No one in the crowd understood it yet, but the celebration had just ended. Rebecca accepted the envelope without lowering the microphone. She glanced at the first page, then looked up with a tight smile. "This appears to be some kind of private property complaint." Rachel stepped beside Sheriff Brooks. "It is an emergency ownership action involving all 16 cabins, the access roads, the clubhouse, and every parcel represented in your sales materials." A murmur moved through the crowd. Douglas Barrett pushed forward. "That's absurd. This is high timber preserve property. We have permits, surveys, and county approvals." Sheriff Brooks looked at him. "Permits don't establish ownership." Rebecca raised the microphone, as though volume might restore control. "Sheriff, you are disrupting a lawful private event on HOA land. Unless you have proof otherwise, I suggest you leave." Daniel Brooks did not argue. He reached into the second document box and removed a folded certified copy of the Mercer deed. The county seal caught the light. "This is the proof," he said. The microphone in Rebecca's hand transmitted the words across the entire clearing. Sheriff Brooks opened the deed and began reading the legal description aloud. Section numbers, boundary calls, creek markers, stone monuments, the northern ridge, the old fence line. Every phrase described the ground beneath us, the stage, the entrance road, the clubhouse, all 16 cabins, Rebecca interrupted. "That document is outdated." Rachel immediately placed the modern title report on the podium. "No transfer has ever been recorded." Linda Foster stepped forward carrying the county index. "I reviewed every deed, lien, easement, correction, and subdivision filing attached to the Mercer Ranch. Ownership has remained uninterrupted." Douglas pointed toward the development map. "Our survey shows a different boundary." Tom Harper emerged from the crowd with his original field notes under one arm. "I drew the county survey your map claims to replace," he said. "It was never replaced." Rachel laid a transparent overlay across the promotional site plan. The false boundary appeared in blue. The recorded Mercer line appeared in red. The cabins sat hundreds of feet inside the red line. The reporters moved closer. Michael Dawson stared at the map, then turned sharply toward Douglas. "You told us title had been cleared." "It was," Douglas replied too quickly. Rachel removed 3 certified warning letters from her portfolio. "No. The county warned you about the overlap before construction began." She held up the signed delivery receipts. "All 3 were accepted by your office." Douglas stopped speaking. That silence changed everything. Rebecca looked from the receipts to the investors, then back to Sheriff Brooks. "This can be resolved. The HOA has maintained and improved this land in good faith." I stepped out from behind the sheriff's vehicles. It was the first time most of them had seen me. Rebecca studied my work jacket and dusty boots with open irritation. "And who are you?" "Caleb Mercer." The name traveled through the crowd faster than any announcement. I walked to the podium and placed my father's leather document case beside the ceremonial scissors. "My family has paid taxes on this ranch for more than 70 years. Rebecca's face tightened. "You knew about the construction." "I discovered it after it started." "And you allowed us to continue?" Rachel answered. "You continued after receiving county warnings. Mr. Mercer documented what you chose to do." Michael Dawson opened his own certified notice. His expression drained as he read the list of affected contracts. Buyers began checking cabin numbers against the legal exhibits. Cabin 4, Cabin 9, Cabin 16. Everyone appeared inside the Mercer boundary. Questions erupted. "Do we own anything? Can the sales close? Where did our deposits go? Rebecca tried to speak over them, but the microphone only magnified the panic. Sheriff Brooks calmly took it from her. This gathering is not being shut down by force, he announced. Poh. But no transfer, sale, or occupation of the disputed structures may proceed until the court reviews ownership. The noise dropped again. Not peace, shock. 16 finished cabins stood behind the crowd, polished and expensive, yet suddenly untouchable. Rebecca looked at me as though silence itself were an accusation. You planned this humiliation. No, I said. I planned to prove ownership. I touched the deed lying open on the podium. You supplied the audience. Sheriff Brooks began serving the remaining notices. One envelope at a time, the development changed from a celebration into a case file. By noon, the ribbon still lay across the road. The champagne remained unopened. And every person who had come to buy a piece of Montana was staring at the same question. What happens when millions of dollars are built on land that never belonged to the seller? The answer arrived before sunset. The county suspended every pending sale tied to High Timber Preserve. Escrow accounts were frozen. Occupancy approvals were placed on hold. No buyer could close. No investor could recover funds without first proving where the money had gone. By Monday morning, Rachel's office was receiving calls from attorneys across the state. Some represented buyers who had paid deposits. Others represented banks that had financed construction. 3 represented investors who had been promised secured interests in cabins built on property the borrower never owned. The project began collapsing from every direction at once. Michael Dawson called an emergency meeting at the county administration building. Rebecca Holloway arrived with Douglas Barrett and 2 attorneys. I sat across from them beside Rachel. No cameras, no crowd. Just polished wood, closed blinds, and a table covered in documents. Michael spoke first. How much will it cost to resolve this? Rachel didn't answer. He looked at me. We can purchase the affected acreage. The affected acreage is part of my ranch. Everything has a price. Not everything. Rebecca leaned forward. Mr. Mercer, be reasonable. The cabins already exist. Families have invested. Jobs depend on this development. I slid one of the county warning letters across the table. Your board had a chance to be reasonable before the first foundation was poured. Her expression changed. Only slightly, but the confidence was gone. Douglas tried another approach. The revised survey was prepared by a licensed contractor. We relied on professional work. Rachel placed his signed delivery receipts beside it. You were warned that survey conflicted with the recorded deed. Douglas looked away. Michael did not. You told us no ownership dispute existed. It was considered resolved. By whom? Douglas had no answer. That silence cost him more than anything he had said at the grand opening. Within 48 hours, the first lawsuits were filed. Buyers accused the HOA of negligent misrepresentation. Investors accused Douglas of fraud. A regional lender demanded immediate repayment on construction loans. Then the insurance companies responded. High Timber Preserve's carrier denied coverage for losses arising from known title defects. Douglas Barrett's professional liability insurer reserved its rights after reviewing the county notices. The board had believed insurance would protect them. Instead, the policies became another set of documents proving what they should have disclosed. News crews parked outside the county courthouse. Reporters stood beneath bright lights describing the project as one of the largest private land disputes the county had ever seen. Rebecca tried to control the damage with a public statement. She called the situation an unfortunate clerical misunderstanding. Linda Foster answered by releasing the certified warning timeline as part of the public court file. 3 warnings, 3 signatures, months before construction. The phrase clerical misunderstanding disappeared from Rebecca's next interview. County inspectors entered the ranch under court authority and documented every structure, cabin 1 through cabin 16. The clubhouse, the paved roads, utility lines, drainage systems, retaining walls. Each improvement was photographed, measured, and tied to exact coordinates inside the Mercer boundary. I walked the site with Sheriff Daniel Brooks while inspectors worked. The cabins looked different now. Not smaller, not cheaper, just exposed. Daniel stopped beside the bronze sign outside cabin 7. Most people would have tried to tear all this down the first week. Most people would have been angry. Weren't you? I still am. He looked toward the ridge. You hit it well. Anger doesn't move boundary lines. That afternoon, Rebecca came to the ranch alone. Her white SUV stopped outside the original Mercer gate. She did not cross it. For the first time, she waited for permission. I met her beside the fence. "We can make you a better offer," she said. "Enough to protect your future and compensate your family." "My family's future is why I'm saying no," her jaw tightened. "Then what do you want?" The truth entered into the record. She looked past me toward the cabins. "And after that? Whatever the court decides." For once, Rebecca had nothing to threaten me with. No board vote, no permit, no brochure. Only 16 cabins standing behind a gate she no longer dared to open. The HOA had spent nearly a year acting as though money created ownership. Now every dollar they had invested was trapped on land controlled by someone else. And the court had not yet decided the most expensive question of all: who legally owned the structures attached to my ranch? That answer came 3 weeks later inside a packed district courtroom. Every seat was filled. Buyers sat beside investors. Reporters lined the back wall. Representatives from title companies and insurance carriers occupied an entire row. No one had come to argue about a fence line anymore. They had come to learn who owned 16 luxury cabins worth millions of dollars. Judge Samuel Whitmore entered promptly at 9. "This court," he began, "is not deciding who built the cabins." He paused before continuing. "This court is deciding where they were built." Rachel stood first. She never raised her voice. She simply walked the judge through the evidence we had spent nearly a year collecting. The Mercer deed, the certified tax records, Tom Harper's original survey, Linda Foster's county index, the certified warning letters signed by Douglas Barrett, the HOA board resolutions signed by Rebecca Holloway, the contractor invoices, the reservation agreements, the inspection reports. Every document pointed to the same conclusion. The cabins stood inside the Mercer Ranch. Douglas's attorney tried to shift the argument. The developer acted in good faith while relying upon a licensed survey. Rachel immediately displayed the 3 county warning notices. Good faith ended the moment these were delivered. The courtroom became noticeably quieter. Rebecca's attorney attempted a different strategy. The HOA invested substantial funds improving the property. Judge Whitmore looked down from the bench. "Investment does not transfer title." Those 5 words changed the room. Michael Dawson slowly lowered his notebook. Several buyers exchanged worried glances. The attorneys stopped whispering. Judge Whitmore continued reviewing the exhibits for nearly an hour before speaking again. "The evidence establishes uninterrupted ownership by Caleb Mercer." He held up the recorded deed. "No conveyance has ever transferred the disputed acreage." Then he turned toward the survey overlay. The structures identified as cabins 1 through 16, together with the associated improvements, were constructed entirely within the Mercer Ranch boundary. Nobody moved. The law is well settled. He looked directly toward both defense tables. Permanent improvements generally follow ownership of the underlying real property unless another lawful interest exists. He closed the file. No such lawful interest has been demonstrated. The courtroom remained silent for several long seconds. Rebecca stared straight ahead. Douglas closed his eyes. Judge Whitmore signed the order. The Mercer Ranch is confirmed as the lawful owner of the disputed acreage. Another signature followed. The completed structures are recognized as improvements attached to that real property. Rachel quietly slid one final document toward the clerk. A motion protecting every cabin from removal or destruction, while the remaining financial disputes proceeded. Granted. The gavel struck once. The ownership question was over. Outside the courthouse, cameras surrounded everyone involved. Reporters shouted questions. Rebecca declined to answer. Douglas left through a side entrance. Michael Dawson stopped beside me. I believed what they showed us. I know. If we'd checked the deed first, you wouldn't have built 16 cabins on my ranch. He nodded once. I wish someone had asked the right question. They did. He looked confused. The county. That afternoon, Rachel filed the court's ownership order with the county recorder. Linda Foster stamped each page before entering it into the public record. From that moment forward, there was no longer a disputed development. There was only the Mercer Ranch, with 16 completed cabins standing on it. Rebecca wasn't finished. 2 days later, she filed an emergency appeal asking the appellate court to stay enforcement. Her attorneys argued that transferring possession before resolving financial claims would cause irreparable harm. The appellate judges reviewed the record. 3 days later, the decision arrived. Appeal denied. The trial court had correctly applied recorded property law. No stay would issue. Sheriff Daniel Brooks called me that evening. The final possession order is signed. When? Tomorrow morning. I thanked him and hung up. For nearly a year, I had watched strangers build a resort across land my grandfather had protected. Now the law had answered the only question that mattered. The cabins had never stopped standing on Mercer land. The court had simply made the rest of the world recognize it. Tomorrow, the sheriff would make sure everyone else did too. Sheriff Daniel Brooks arrived just after sunrise with 2 deputies, a county clerk, and copies of the final possession order sealed by the district court. There were no flashing lights, no raised voices, no spectacle. After months of headlines and courtroom arguments, the final step looked almost ordinary. Rebecca Holloway and Douglas Barrett were already waiting outside the clubhouse with their attorneys. The confidence they had carried through the grand opening was gone. In its place stood exhaustion. Sheriff Brooks greeted everyone with the same calm professionalism he had shown from the beginning. This order confirms lawful possession of the Mercer Ranch, including the structures identified in the court's judgment. He handed certified copies to each attorney. The transfer will proceed peacefully. No one objected. There was nothing left to argue. County officials walked through the development one final time, recording the condition of every structure. Cabin 1, Cabin 2, all the way through Cabin 16, the clubhouse, maintenance buildings, roads, parking areas, utility systems. Every improvement was checked against the court's inventory before being formally transferred into the possession of the Mercer Ranch. Rebecca watched silently. Finally, she walked toward me. I thought confidence would carry us through. I looked past her toward the cabins. Confidence isn't ownership. She nodded slowly. I know that now. There was no anger left in her voice. Only the weight of consequences that had arrived one legal document at a time. Douglas Barrett approached next. I should have stopped when the county sent those notices. Yes, I kept telling myself we'd solve it later. Later eventually becomes today. He extended his hand. Not to negotiate, not to bargain, simply to acknowledge the truth. After a brief pause, I shook it. The case had never been personal for me. It had always been about protecting land my family had trusted me to preserve. By midday, moving trucks began leaving the property. Temporary offices were emptied. Construction trailers disappeared down the county road. The oversized high timber preserve entrance sign was carefully removed under county supervision. For the first time since I'd returned home, The northern ridge looked like part of the Mercer Ranch again. Only now 16 finished cabins stood among the pines. Reporters gathered outside the main gate for one last statement. Someone asked whether I planned to demolish the cabins. I smiled. My grandfather believed land should be cared for, not wasted. So what's next? The ranch moves forward. Rachel Bennett joined me after the cameras were packed away. You realize those cabins are legally yours now? I do. And? I looked across the valley. My father spent his life protecting this place. The cabins overlooked some of the finest elk habitat on the ranch. We'll use them the right way. Not as an exclusive resort, not as a symbol of someone else's ambition, but as part of a working ranch that respected the land beneath it. Weeks later, the lawsuits between investors, lenders, insurers, and the former HOA board continued in other courtrooms. Those financial battles no longer involved me. Judge Samuel Whitmore's ruling had answered the only question that mattered: who owned the land? Everything else followed from that answer. On a cool autumn evening, I stood beside the old wooden entrance gate where my father had once rested his hand on my shoulder. He used to tell me, people can move fences, they can move signs, they can even move survey stakes if they think no one's watching. Then he'd tap the leather document case he always carried. But recorded truth has a way of finding its way home. I understood those words better than ever. The Mercer Ranch remained exactly what it had been before the first bulldozer crossed the boundary. Family land. Protected not by anger, not by threats, but by patience, evidence, and the law. The cabins still stood beneath the Montana pines, a permanent reminder of the most expensive lesson the High Timber Preserve HOA would ever learn. Money can build roads, power can attract followers, confidence can fill a stage with applause, but none of them can rewrite a recorded deed. And in the end, the oldest document on the ranch proved stronger than the newest development. Paper outlived pride, just as my father always said it would.
Looking back, the biggest lessons I carry from this experience has nothing to do with seizing cabins or a courtroom. It's that protecting something important often means staying patient when every instinct tells you to react. My family didn't keep this ranch for generations because they argued the loudest. They kept it because it respected the law. Reserved every record, and understood that too has a way of standing firm when everything else starts to shake. That's a lesson I never forget. And I hope it stays with you too. Stories like this remind me that dignity isn't about proving someone else wrong. It's about standing on solid ground, knowing what you have, and letting honor speak for itself. Whether it's a piece of land, a family tradition, or simply doing what's right, those things are worth protecting with calm determination rather than anger. Now I'd love to hear from you. If you were in Calaboo's, would you have stopped the construction immediately, or would you have trusted the legal process the way he did? Comment 1 if you have acted right way, or comment 2 if you wait and let the evidence build. And if you ever deal with an HOA, a property dispute, or a situation where paperwork makes all the difference, share your story below. If you enjoy stories about ordinary people standing their ground with patience, integrity, and the law, I'd be honored to help you subscribe and join us for the next journey. There's always another story waiting just beyond the next gate.